other areas in the arts, which is kind of what this whole course has kind of been focused on, at least for the last few weeks. So tell me for a minute, what's an analogy? Comparing something to something else, right? And from the time you were in 3rd grade, you've been doing activities with analogies, right? In literature, I'm sure all your tests that you took, whether it was the SAT or even tests that you took before that as an elementary school student, had analogies on them. Why do you think that's so important? Why do we want students to think about things in terms of comparison? Comparing one thing to another. Because what, Ashley?
It's easier to learn that way.
They're exactly right, yeah. Remember when we talked about thinking conceptually? When we think conceptually, that's how our brains are just geared to work. We compare things to other things, right? We decide if a dog is a dog because it looks furry, it has 4 legs, it's cute, comes and sniffles and nudges at us, right? We know that all those things put together are like what goes together to make a dog, right? A cat has all those things too, but how do we know the difference between a cat and a dog? Okay, the cat's going to meow and the dog's going to bark, right? So that's one of the things that we use to separate those two things. Okay, so thinking in terms of comparisons and differences is something that's really important, and that's a big part of what we're going to do with your final projects, your art projects that you're doing. So take a look at these elements I've got here. I've got elements of art, elements of literature, and elements of music. So if we look at the elements of music, we've got things like melody, harmony, rhythm, texture, form, dynamics. Those are the things that go together to create this big idea that we call music. Okay, when we look at the elements of art, you've got things like color, line, shape, value and tone, texture, volume and form. Do you see any ways that these elements of art are similar to the elements of music? How are they similar? Let's pick one, for instance. Let's pick volume. Do you see anything that's similar in the elements of music? Dynamics. Volume and dynamics, right? Very similar. What about form? Do you see anything? Yeah, form. Okay, and form is an element of art. Form is an element of music, right? So pretty easy to make that transfer. What about a trickier one? Think about color. Is there anything in the elements of music that would be similar to color? Timbre. Timbre is really sound color, right? How something sounds. Remember we talked about that definition of timbre, what it means? It just means the color of the sound, right? So the timbre of a tuba is different than the timbre of like bells, right? Totally different. What about texture? What would that transfer to in elements of music? Texture. Okay, so musically, texture means what? Usually how many people are playing at once, right? Is the full orchestra playing, or is it just a accompaniment with maybe a flute soloist, right? Well, texture in art is just like it sounds, like the texture of this material that I've got on here is very transparent, right? Very thin. But maybe the texture of this sweatshirt right here is a lot thicker, kind of similar to when the full orchestra is playing. So Brian, you were bringing me your art project and asked me about it. One thing you could look at is texture, right? Were there places where the texture in the music was thinner, kind of like this? And were there places where it was thicker, kind of like your sweatshirt over here? So when you're doing your art project, think about how the music you heard compared to some of these elements of art, okay? What about elements of literature? Let's look at one of them. How about mood? Is there a place where that transfers over to music? Mood, yeah. So when Stephanie wrote her poem about, she shared it with me that she was at the talent show out here, and she was watching some of the students perform. There was an overall mood that she felt, and she created this mood in her poem, similar to the mood that she felt when she was listening to the music. So I want you to kind of see if you can transfer these things across disciplines, okay? Whenever you do that for your students, it makes learning so much more meaningful, right? Have you ever been in a history class where you talk about something that you've already learned before in another course? Yeah, and whenever you can do that, it's more meaningful for you, it's more meaningful for your students. Anytime you connect across disciplines, it's always a great thing. Okay, so here's some common concepts across art, music, dance, all art forms, things like repetition and enlargement, contrast, unity, balance, right? Let's look for a minute at repetition. If you had to look around the classroom now, and I told you to look for repetition, what do you see that is repetitive? The bricks. Yeah, look at the patterns of the bricks. Very repetitive. Where else do you see repetition? Ceiling tiles. Where else? Cabinets. Good. Where else? Desks. Good. The blinds are very repetitive. Our world is very ordered. People like order, right? So we see this repetition everywhere. In music too, right? Where do you see repetition in the natural world? Say you went out to go take a hike over fall break. You go out to Itasca State Park and you're looking around. Where would you see repetitive things in nature? Flower petals. Say you look at a daisy or a rose. It's the same pattern, just it gets smaller each time, right? From the petals of the rose that curl around. You ever seen a sunflower and you take a look at the inner circle of a sunflower? Those seeds are arranged in this circular pattern that's very repetitive, right? Where else might you see repetition in nature? Yeah, the waves. Good. Exactly. Tides in the ocean, right? The cycles of the moon. Happens the same way every time, right? Every month we get a new cycle of the moon. The cycle of the seasons. We are hardwired for repetition, aren't we? Our bodies thrive on repetitive patterns. Well, how would you observe that in music? Think about some of the music we've heard so far. What kind of things repeat that you've seen in music? Chords. You remember that 4-chord song we heard? The video I showed you where the guys pulled together about 60 different songs that use the same 4 chords over and over again. Pop music thrives on those same 4 chords, right? Where else do you see repetition in music?
Ostinatos.
Ostinatos! Woo woo! Using music terms. I love it. What's an ostinato? Repeated pattern, baby. Yep, we got a repeated pattern every time we got an ostinato, right? We're going to take a look at a piece of music that you built around the whole ostinato. A lot of your compositions you're working on now are built around ostinatos. Yeah, good. Okay, look at this poem. Take a minute and read through it, and then we're going to read it to a steady beat. If you were going to find a steady beat in this poem, where would it be? Okay, let's try and read it together. 2, ready, and workers earn it, spendthrifts burn it, bankers lend it, women spend it, forgers fake it, taxes take it, dying leave it, heirs receive it, thrifters save it, misers crave it, robbers seize it, rich increase it, gamblers lose it, I could use it. Yeah. Repetition? Yeah, poetry a lot of times uses repetition. So if you choose to write a poem for your artistic response and you heard repetition in the music that you heard, well, maybe you might want to incorporate some repetition into your poetry. Let's take a look at this one. See if you find a steady beat in that. Let's read it. 2, ready? And I saw a fish pond all on fire. I saw a house bow to a squire. I saw a person 12 feet high. I saw a cottage near the sky. Saw a balloon made of lead. I saw a coffin drop down dead. I saw 2 sparrows run a race. I saw 2 horses making lace. I saw a girl just like a cat. I saw a kitten wear a hat. I saw a man who saw these 2 and said, though strange, they all were true. you guys are going to be out in elementary school teaching reading, right? And one of the things when you're teaching reading that you want is for your students to read with fluency, right? Instead of reading like William Shatner. Mike, read a book. You don't want your students to read a story like this. No, you want that fluency and that steady beat in their reading too. You see how there's a transfer between that and this poem and in the songs that we teach and when we use steady beat? Repetitions in music all the time. Think about some simple songs that you learned in elementary school, like The Wheels on the Bus. The wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. The wheels on the bus go round and round, all through the town. The wipers on the bus go swish, 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 swish. The wipers on the bus go swish, 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 all through the town. The people on the bus go up and down, up and down, up and down. The people on the bus go up and down, all through the town. The horn on the bus goes toot, 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 toot. The horn on the bus goes toot, 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 all through the town. If I added a verse about the babies on the bus, would it use the same melody? Yeah, so that melody repeats, right? Okay, I got a piece of music for you to listen to. I want you to think about how the composer creates some kind of interest in this piece by using the same thing that still repeats over and over and over. This piece is called Bolero by Raychl. What was repeated all throughout that piece? The snare part. And visually, how did they show that? How did they isolate just the snare drum? Yes, spotlight. He's the only person not moving, right? And he's in white. The only person in white. Everybody else, for the most part, is in black, except for these two cymbal players, right? So they kind of set that apart. What musically was that? What do we call it when somebody has a repeated pattern? Ostinato. He was the ostinato part. And the ostinato was... right? Do it with me. 2. Here we go. Up, 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 up. Yeah. Repeated throughout the whole piece. There wasn't a single time when that ostinato wasn't going on. So, you would think, well, that would get pretty boring, right? Well, how did the composer create interest? What did they do? Different instruments, right? So, if we use different instruments, then we're using different timbres, right? Different sounds. How else do we create interest there? Movement. Interest through the movement. What else changed if we go back to these elements of music? And this pot right here, what changed? Dynamics, good. So times when it was louder and times when it was softer. If the dynamics changed, what else do you think changed? Texture, yeah. So there were places when there were thin textures, right? Maybe just a little quartet playing the melody. And then places where everybody was playing, like at the very end, and the texture was really thick. Great. So you guys can do similar things in your small improv groups. You can take an ostinato and build on that ostinato, change the dynamics, change the textures. That sort of thing is really effective. Contrast is something that makes music really more interesting, right? Anybody been to a cathedral where you've seen really gorgeous stained glass? Yeah. And what makes stained glass pop is not just the glass, but like what's in between the glass. You see the black there? That's what really makes the colors pop, right? Because there's a huge contrast between the bright colors and then the black. So, I've got another piece for you to listen to. And this one, I want you to think about how the composer ties ideas together and creates a sense of unity in this music. This is Spring from the Four Seasons by Vivaldi. You've got a nice little listening map here you can follow. Sound like birds almost? Yeah. Idea came back, right? Long note values here, right? Here comes that same idea. Vivaldi create unity there? What tied that piece all together? Yeah, that repeated part of it. Good, John. Happened over and over, didn't it? Right? So remember we talked about a form in music where you have an A idea, the theme, and then you get something different, B, right? A comes back, then you get something different, we'll call it C. A comes back, what happens next? D. A comes back, then E, right? So that's called rondo form in music, when you've got that same idea that keeps returning, but in between it each time there's sandwiched something new, right? New material. And you can kind of almost see that with the images, couldn't you? Yeah. Okay, so same idea in art, this idea of balance. If you look at this picture of the Last Supper, that's one of the most famous paintings that I can think of where there's a real sense of balance on each side, right? Who's in the very center? Who is that guy? That's Jesus, right? In the very center. How many people are to his left? 6. How many people are to his right? 6. Good. How many big windows are to his left? 1. How many big windows to his right? 1. And then you can almost see the darker windows off to the side, like that, right? You could flip this painting in half, couldn't you? And it would be symmetrical. Look at the Taj Mahal. Do you see a focal point? Yeah. When I look, I see the focal point as being this little arch right here in the very middle, right? Can you think of another famous building that you could like split down the middle and it would be symmetrical? Think about in the United States. Can you think of a famous building that looks like that? The White House, yep. You see people do that crazy stuff with the dollar bills where they fold it and they're like, oh my gosh, there's a flame-eating dragon popping out of my dollar bill if I fold it 500 different ways, right? Well, that stuff works on symmetry, right? Because our currency, when you look at it, is very symmetrical. So if you fold it in different ways, then you can find all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories about what's on your money. Whatever. I don't know. Taj Mahal symmetrical. What else? White House. What other buildings are symmetrical? Empire State Building. What about on our campus? Good. Almost every building we've got. Really? What's the one with the vine and the ivy? Weld. Very symmetrical, right? You could fold weld in half. Okay. Balance happens all the time in poetry. If you were going to give this a form that we've learned in class, what form would this be in? ABA, right? Same, different, same. Take a minute and read through this poem. See if you can find a steady beat in it. Let's read it. Okay. Here we go. A goblin lives in our house, in our house, in our house. A goblin lives in our house all year round. He bumps and he jumps and he thumps and he stumps. He knocks and he rocks and he rattles at the locks. A goblin lives in our house, in our house, in our house. A goblin lives in our house all year long. Right? Yeah. Steady beat and it's got balance, right? It's ABA. Think about some Christmas songs that you know. Like, We Wish You a Merry Christmas. Let's see if we can figure out the form of We Wish You a Merry Christmas. Let's sing it. Here we go. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Good tidings we bring to you and your kin. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. What's the form? ABA, you're exactly right. Reindeer, Santa Claus reindeer form, right? ABA, same, different, same. So, when you're creating your art projects, this is what I want you to do. After you've been to your concert, think about what you heard, the melody you heard, the rhythm, harmony, texture, form, timbre, mood. Write these things down, okay? They're in your textbook, but if you don't have them memorized, write down these elements of music. Melody, rhythm, harmony, texture, form, timbre, and mood. Those are the words that I'm looking for. When you explain your art piece next Thursday in class, you hold it up and you talk about it. I'm going to look for you using some of these words. Melody, rhythm, harmony, texture, form, timbre, mood. You don't have to use all of them, but pick out 2 or 3 that you're going to really talk about and focus on. 3 or 4 maybe if you're really rocking it. And then how can you illustrate those through your artwork? So what questions do you have about sharing your art pieces on Thursday? You feel okay about it? If you've got questions, you email them to me. Okay? All right, this is what we're going to do for the remainder of the class period. In your groups, you're going to meet in the same rooms that you were in on Tuesday. So if you were in the conference room, you're still in the conference room. If you were meeting in my office, you're still meeting in my office. If you were in a practice room, you're still in the practice room. And in your groups, I want you to compile some of the resources that you've been looking at, okay, for your final project. You're going to end up with 5, at least 5, okay? By the time your project's over, you're going to have more than 5. But for right now, because by tonight at 11:59, when you email me a list, I want you to have 5 references. The format and how you send it to me doesn't matter to me. You can use APA, you can use MLA, you can use a hybrid of those. As long as I can find that resource if I'm looking for it. If it's a book, I can go find it. If it's a website, I can have the web address and go find it. That's what I'm looking for. Then I want you to do a little 5-sentence summary of that resource. So just 5 sentences on what you learned from reading that article or from that website and how you're going to use it in your project. Okay? I want these to be in a Word file, so don't send them just in the body of an email. Send them in a Word file and list your group number. Remember your numbers, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then your group members' names, so I know what group you're in. And once you're done meeting in your groups, once you feel good about getting this assignment taken care of and who's going to send it to me tonight, then you're free to go. Okay? All right. I will see you Thursday. Have a fantastic fall break.
Yeah.